The Sovam 1100 VS, a unique French sports car from the 1960s. This little-known gem has an interesting story that's worth exploring. Now, Sovam was started by André Morin in France back in 1930. At first, they made practical vehicles like mobile shops on truck platforms, but as cars changed over time, Sovam decided to try something new in the 1960s. They started making sports cars. The Sovam 1100 VS came out in 1966, right when car makers were getting really creative. It was part of a trend of small, light sports cars that were popping up all over. This model came after the 850 VS and was meant to be sportier and more powerful. Sovam used what they knew about making light structures to create a car that could perform well without needing a huge engine. Even though the Sovam 1100 VS was innovative, it didn't become super popular. This was partly because it looked a bit strange and they didn't make very many of them. It had to compete with more well-known sports cars like the Alpine A110 and Matra 530. Sovam only made fewer than 150 cars from 1965 to 1968, which is why they're so rare today. They didn't make many because they were aiming for a specific group of buyers, and they didn't have a lot of money. The 1100 VS looked kind of weird from other sports cars of its time. It was small and aerodynamic with a low profile and smooth curves. They made the body out of fiberglass, which was light and easy to shape. This let Sovam create a sporty, aerodynamic design that stood out from the usual metal-bodied cars. The front of the car had a wide grille and round headlights, giving it a quirky but appealing look. The back had a sloping roofline that went all the way down to the rear, which helped with aerodynamics and made it look unique. The roof was a Targa style, which means you could take part of it off for an open-top feel without completely removing the roof structure. Sovam built the 1100 VS on a steel frame borrowed from the Renault 4 and 8. This gave the car a solid base while keeping it light. It had a short wheelbase, which made it nimble and fun to drive on twisty roads. They often painted these cars in bright colors, fitting the lively spirit of the 1960s. Under the hood, the Sovam 1100 VS had a 1,108 cubic centimeter Renault Cléonfonte engine. This four-cylinder engine was known for being reliable and efficient. It was used in other Renault cars too, so it was a trusted choice. The engine produced about 62 horsepower at 6,300 revolutions per minute. That might not sound like much now, but it was enough for this light car. The Sovam 1100 VS weighed about 1,257 pounds, which helped it accelerate and handle well, even with its modest power. It had a 4-speed manual transmission that let drivers make the most of the engine's power. The gear ratios were chosen to balance acceleration and top speed, making it enjoyable to drive in cities and on open roads. Interestingly, the 1100 VS had its engine in the front middle of the car and drove the front wheels. This was unusual for sports cars, which usually had rear-wheel drive. But the front-wheel drive setup gave good traction and stability, especially in bad weather. The car had independent suspension on all 4 wheels, taken from the Renault 4, which helped it ride smoothly and stay controlled. Inside, the VS was simple and functional. The cabin was small, matching the car's overall size, but it was laid out thoughtfully to be comfortable for the driver and passenger. The seats were supportive and designed to hold you in place during spirited driving. While the 1100 VS didn't have a lot of fancy features, some models came with extras like a radio and better upholstery. The interior materials were chosen to be durable and light, fitting with the car's performance focus. Despite being small, the Sovam had enough space to make driving enjoyable, making it good for weekend trips or fun drives. The engine had a compression ratio of 9.0 to 1, which was normal for engines like this at the time. The fuel tank held about 26 liters, giving it a reasonable driving range for a small sports car. The car's small size and nimble handling were emphasized by its light steering and responsive suspension. But the Sovam cars wasn't just for driving on roads. It also took part in racing events while it was being made. It competed in various rallies across France, showing off its performance and durability. One notable event was the Paris-Calcutta-Paris race in 1966, where a Sovam 850 VS, driven by Maite Patou and co-driven by Chantal Bernard, completed the challenging 18,500-kilometer journey. In 1967, The Sovam 1100 VS competed in the 12th Rallye National d'Automne in La Rochelle, where it did well in the women's class. The car's participation in racing helped show how reliable and capable it was, even though it wasn't as well known as some of its competitors. Many amateur drivers also raced the Sovam 1100 VS in regional and national rallies. These events showed off the car's agility and handling, making it popular among private racers who liked its balance of performance and cost. The Sovam's presence in racing added to its legacy as a unique and capable sports car. The Enzmann 506 is a unique sports car with an interesting background. It first appeared at the Frankfurt Auto Show in 1957. The Enzmann family from Switzerland created this car, with Emil Enzmann leading the project. They wanted to make a light, affordable sports car that combined the practicality of a Volkswagen Beetle with the style of a European sports car. The design of the Enzmann 506 was influenced by the curvy, sleek look popular in the 1950s. They used fiberglass for the body, which made it light and strong. This material choice also helped prevent rust, a common problem for metal cars back then. Using fiberglass also made it easier to create complex shapes. The fiberglass body was put on a Volkswagen Beetle frame. This was a smart choice because Beetle parts were easy to find, and the mechanics were already proven to work well. The Enzmann 506 had a low, sporty look with a smooth front that flowed into a sloping back. This shape not only looked good, but also helped the car move through the air better. It had big, round headlights and a small grille, which made it stand out. The car only had 2 seats, showing it was all about the driving experience. Inside, the Enzmann 506 was simple. The dashboard had the basic things you need, like a speedometer and fuel gauge. Everything was easy for the driver to reach. The seats were basic, but comfortable enough for sports car driving. The Enzmann 506 used an engine from the Volkswagen Beetle. The first models had a 1.2-liter flat-4 engine that was cooled by air. It made about 34 horsepower, which doesn't sound like much now, but it was good enough back then, especially since the car was so light. But some owners wanted more power, so they changed their engines. Some put in bigger 1.3-liter engines, and some even used Porsche engines. These changes made the cars faster and better for racing in events like hill climbs and amateur races. The Enzmann 506 also used suspension parts from the Beetle. This setup made the car handle well on twisty roads, but still ride smoothly at higher speeds. They didn't make many Enzmann 506s, only about 100 to 150 between 1957 and the late 1960s. Each car was built by hand, so everyone was a bit different, and the car was fully customizable. Even though they didn't make many, car fans really liked the Enzmann 506. It was sold as a fun, affordable sports car for people who wanted something different. Its lightweight and good handling made it popular in local races. Most Enzmann 506s were sold in Switzerland and other parts of Europe, but a few made it to the United States and other countries. Because there weren't many of them, collectors started looking for these rare cars. Driving an Enzmann 506 was really fun. The car was light and balanced, so it responded quickly when you turned the steering wheel. This made it great for driving on winding roads. The manual transmission, usually with 4 speeds, made you feel more connected to the car. You sat low in the 506 close to the road. This made you feel like you were going fast and really part of the driving experience. The inside was simple, but everything was easy to reach. The sound of the engine in the back added to the experience. The Enzmann 506 wasn't as refined as modern sports cars, but it gave drivers a raw and unfiltered driving experience. This appealed to people who enjoyed the mechanical aspects of driving. The Enzmann family's work on this car shows how much they loved cars and new ideas. Emil Enzmann's dream of making a light, fun sports car came true with the 506. His family made sure each car was built well. It reminds us of a time when small car makers could create special vehicles that stood out. It shows the creativity and determination of the car industry after World War II, when people with big ideas could make their car dreams come true. Let's talk about the Rochdale Olympic, a cool British sports car from the 1960s. This car has a special place in car history because it was lightweight and handled really well on the road. Rochdale Motor Panels and Engineering made this car. They started out making fiberglass parts for other car makers and people who like to build their own cars. The two guys who started the company, Harry Smith and Frank Butterworth, thought fiberglass was pretty awesome. They decided to make a whole car using this material. The Olympic wasn't just a car you could buy ready-made, it was also a project for car lovers. You could get it as a kit and put it together yourself. This was a big deal back then because lots of people were into customizing their own rides. When you bought an Olympic kit, you got the body shell and some basic parts. But here's the cool part. You could pick your own engine, gearbox, and other bits. This meant every Olympic could be a bit different, which car enthusiasts really liked. The Olympic's design was all about being light and strong. They used something called monocoque construction. This means the body and frame were one piece, not separate like in many other cars. This made the Olympic lighter and stiffer than cars built the old way. The outside of the car looks sleek and sporty. It sat low to the ground, which made it handle better and go faster. The smooth lines of the fiberglass body didn't just look good, they also helped the car slip through the air more easily. Inside, the Olympic was pretty simple. The dashboard had just the important stuff, speedometer, rev counter, and fuel gauge, but if you bought it as a kit, you could jazz it up however you wanted. Most people put Ford engines in their Olympics. The 1.5-liter Ford engine was a popular choice because it was powerful and didn't break down much. But some owners tried out different engines from other car makers like Riley and BMC. The Olympic was quick for its time. It could go over 100 miles per hour, which was impressive back then. It was light and well balanced, so it could zip around corners really well. This made it popular with people who liked to race cars or drive them up hills in competitions. The car's suspension was designed to give a smooth ride, but also handle well at high speeds. It used torsion bars at the front and coil springs at the back. Production of the Olympics started in 1960 with the Phase 1 model. They made about 250 of these until 1962. Then, in 1963, they came out with the Phase 2. This newer version had some improvements like better rear suspension and cooling. They also made it easier to get to the trunk. Rochdale made about 300 Phase 2 Olympics until 1967. In the end, the Rochdale Olympic might not be as well known as some other sports cars from the 1960s, but it definitely left its mark on car history. It showed that with some clever engineering and new materials, you could make a car that was fun to drive, affordable, and could be put together by the owners themselves. That's a pretty cool legacy for a little British sports car.